Fine, I'll marry him. As soon as Sophia uttered these words, the bustling hall fell silent. Everyone turned to look at her, their faces filled with doubt, as if they had misheard what she just said.
Stop this nonsense. She immediately scolded Sophia, fearing she was acting on impulse.
Sophia is doing this for the good of the Smith family. Tomorrow is the wedding day, and this matter cannot be delayed.
Helen couldn't hide the joy on her face. Without a second thought, she stood up and addressed Margaret.
If you could keep an eye on your daughter, would this have happened?
Helen's face was full of embarrassment. After all, Olivia's elopement was partly her fault. Margaret looked up at Catherine, who was sitting nearby. Without saying a word, it was clear she wanted Catherine to choose between Emily and Isabella. Standing in the corner, Isabella silently patted Emily on the shoulder. Isabella was Catherine's biological daughter, while Emily was born to Sarah. Everyone knew what choice Catherine would make. Robert sighed, John lowered his head, and William wiped the corners of his eyes. Even Sarah, who usually had a cheerful demeanor, was quietly sobbing, and even the usually jovial cousin had a downturned mouth, as if tomorrow's event was not a wedding but a mourning. Indeed, with Ethan's life hanging by a thread, tomorrow's celebration was no different from a mourning. Catherine looked troubled. Although Emily wasn't her biological daughter, she was very endearing. Now, being asked to make such a choice was difficult for her to articulate. Helen was the only one who seemed at ease. Despite causing such a mess, she still had the nerve to smile. How shameless! The hall was extremely quiet, and everyone's faces were clouded with gloom. Sophia took a deep breath and walked to the center, loudly saying,
Margaret, let me marry him. My two younger sisters are still young and naive. How can we let them marry at this time? Besides, you always said that among the four of us sisters, I am the luckiest. Perhaps my marriage will bring good fortune to the young general.
No, you are still young and have never even touched needlework. How can we let you marry?
Moreover, you are quite frail. The Wu family is full of rough people. What if you get hurt?
You can't marry. If it comes to that, let Emily marry him.
The Smith family caused this trouble, and the Smith family should solve it. What are you, an outsider, meddling for?
Margaret was genuinely angry this time. She instructed the maid behind her.
The young lady is confused. Take her back to her room to prevent her from saying anything crazy.
The maid came to support Sophia, but she refused to get up. She had her own plans. Although the young general might not survive, the Wu family had no tradition of accompanying the deceased. Marrying him would only mean being a widow, not a death sentence.
At worst, I would take care of the young general for the rest of my life. How hard could it be to care for a bedridden person? I wasn't pampered, I could handle it.
This marriage, which no one favored, was a rare opportunity for Sophia. First, her days wouldn't be hard, and she could avoid household conflicts. Second, marrying now would earn her a good reputation, and the Smith family would feel more indebted to her because of her mother's situation. If Margaret passed away in the future, the three uncles would remember Sophia's kindness and treat her well. On the contrary, if she didn't speak up, even if her two sisters and aunts didn't say anything, they would feel resentful towards her.
Grandfather gave me the Smith surname, so I am part of the Smith family. I have enjoyed the family's blessings, how can I avoid its difficulties? Besides, if it weren't for my uncles, I would have died in the Anderson family long ago. Now is the time for me to repay the favor. If I don't marry, should we let my two naive sisters marry instead?
The hall fell silent again. Sophia's two sisters knelt beside her, crying and murmuring.
Sister, don't say that. If someone has to marry, let it be me.
The uncles looked at Margaret. After a long silence, she finally spoke.
It's not that the Smith family has done you a favor, it's that we owe you. Your mother married into that dreadful family because of us. Do you want to end up like her?
My mother always told me that the greater the blessing, the greater the responsibility. For me, it's the same.
Margaret said no more. She just looked at Sophia quietly, as if seeing someone else through her. Sophia knew she was thinking of her unfortunate mother, who had been miserable in the Anderson family and died at the age of 30. Sophia straightened her back, just like her mother did years ago. But unlike her mother, she wasn't naive. Her actions were not for the Smith family but for her future.
You are the eldest daughter of the Smith family. If you are mistreated in your husband's house, come back. The Smith family can support you.
Margaret closed her eyes, her face full of sorrow. Her words solidified Sophia's position in the Smith family. From today, she was truly one of them. With teary eyes, Sophia kowtowed to Margaret several times, thanking her for her care over the years and expressing her guilt towards her. Sophia always knew that Margaret wanted to make up for her guilt towards her mother through her. But now, her actions only added to her guilt. Sophia also understood that her uncles and aunts genuinely cared for her. But her experiences in the Anderson family had made it impossible for her to fully accept their love. So, she had to make them feel guilty to have a real support system. Sophia married into the Wu family as a daughter of the Smith family. The elders of the Wu family showed no emotion. After all, Olivia's elopement had caused quite a stir. If it weren't for the Smith family's reputation, this marriage would have been called off long ago. But whether it was a broken engagement or a new bride, it made no difference to the Wu family. It was still a wedding, and they couldn't show displeasure on the wedding day, as they had agreed to the marriage. Although Ethan was unconscious, the wedding was lively. George had helped the former emperor conquer most of the kingdom and held a high position. Thomas held the tiger tally, making the Wu family very influential. If Ethan hadn't been injured, such a marriage would never have fallen to the Smith family. On the wedding day, it was Ethan's sister, Lily, who came to fetch Sophia. This remarkable woman, dressed in red, hurriedly came forward to support her.
My brother is ill, so I, his sister, must stand in. Sister-in-law, please don't be angry.
Thank you for your kindness, sister. How could I blame you?
Through the veil, Sophia saw the tanned girl. The Wu siblings were interesting, one couldn't tan, and the other couldn't stay pale. It was quite fascinating. Sophia got into the bridal sedan, and the festive sound of Swana began. She immediately grabbed the window frame, but the expected shaking didn't happen. Instead, the sedan was very stable, unlike the one she had ridden in Longxi.
The bride is very fortunate. These sedan bearers were specially arranged by the Wu family to ensure the bride wouldn't be jostled on the way.
The matchmaker outside said with a smile, full of envy. Indeed, having such a considerate in-law family was a blessing. But unfortunately, blessings or misfortunes, who could predict? Sophia clenched her handkerchief. She was also afraid of facing a dying husband, afraid of the lifeless mansion. But since she made this choice, she had to bear the consequences. The townspeople set off firecrackers in front of their homes, the crackling sound accompanying the bridal sedan throughout the capital, as if hoping to wake the young general from his slumber. But no amount of firecrackers could wake him. When Sophia saw the young general lying in bed, a thought crossed her mind. His sallow face and emaciated appearance reminded her of her mother before she passed away. The young general probably didn't have much time left. Sophia reached out to touch his forehead. It wasn't hot but rather frighteningly cold. According to Robert, the young general had been severely injured by a traitor's plot and had been unconscious since being brought to the capital. Sophia looked around. The servants in the bridal chamber had left, so she reached out again, this time towards the young general's nose. She closed her eyes, thinking that if he died now, it might anger the Wu family. However, even if it did, her life in the Wu family wouldn't be too difficult. She still had her maternal family to rely on, and if the Wu family needed to adopt a child to continue the lineage, it would have to be under her name. So, marrying the young general was all gain and no loss for her.
But before she could finish her thought, her fingers touched something strange. She opened her eyes to find her fingers in the young general's mouth, and he was looking at her with a puzzled expression. The young general had woken up. At first, I thought it was just a fleeting moment of consciousness, but after 4 or 5 imperial physicians checked his pulse, my guess was proven wrong.
Overnight, I became the Wu family's lucky star. However, my little scheme had fallen through, and naturally, I felt disappointed. But I chose to feign happiness to deal with the Wu family members who came to visit the young general. After everyone left, the young general looked at me.
There's no one else here. You don't have to fake a smile.
My smile froze. I thought I had hidden my true feelings well, but I didn't expect to be seen through by someone I had only met once. I stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do.
I dislike people who beat around the bush. Just tell me what you think directly.
All right, I replied softly, though my face still felt unnatural. I didn't like exposing my thoughts directly. It made me feel as vulnerable as a naked savage, extremely uncomfortable.
You're really strange.
I didn't know how to respond. I didn't dare to respond. I didn't even dare to look at him. I was afraid that if I looked up, I would reveal everything about myself. I was even more afraid that he would see the disappointment in my eyes, the disappointment I felt when I saw he had woken up. We didn't speak. One lay down, and the other stood until the cold wind outside made the windows creak. I walked over to close them tightly.
Aren't you going to sleep?
I understood his meaning and slipped into the bed he had already warmed. A faint smell of herbs filled my nose, not pungent but slightly bitter. I yawned. To be honest, I was already a bit sleepy while standing, but I didn't dare move without his permission.
David.
I mumbled, not understanding his meaning.
Don't tell me you don't even know your husband's name?
I suddenly found myself at a loss for words, not knowing what to say. I could only clutch the corner of the quilt to ease my unease.
I was just teasing you.
Just as I was feeling tense, he said lightly, making me feel like a monkey performing tricks. I was annoyed. What kind of person was this? I lay back down, tightly wrapping myself in the quilt.
Are you angry?
His familiar voice came from behind again. I covered my ears, pretending not to hear.
Good, be angry. I'm not your elder, so there's no need to be so respectful to me.
The man behind me said with a yawn, then casually threw his arm over me, almost making it hard for me to breathe. But for some reason, his casual gesture made me feel closer to him. It was strange. The next day, I woke up in his arms. He was like a furnace, and I was startled as soon as I woke up.
Am I that scary?
You still have the energy to joke with me? I reached out to touch his forehead. Be careful not to get a fever and become silly. But his forehead wasn't hot, indicating he didn't have a fever.
Why do I feel like someone is disappointed?
He said, staring at my face with a teasing look in his eyes. I'm not. Although I had hoped for his demise before, now that he was alive, I wouldn't wish for an innocent person to pass away just for my comfort. He continued to look at me with a mischievous smile, as if thinking about how to tease me next. I was already scared of him, so after getting dressed and washing up, I quickly escaped the small room. It was really strange. Someone who had been bedridden for so long was now acting as if nothing had happened and even had the energy to tease others. It was truly odd. Could he be pretending to be sick? But with so many imperial physicians, how could he deceive them? Besides, his complexion couldn't be faked. I had seen his complexion change from deathly pale to radiant with my own eyes. Could it be fate? But the person whose birth date matched his was Olivia, not me. I couldn't figure out the mystery, so I decided not to think about it. Whether he was pretending or favored by the heavens, what did it have to do with me? As soon as I stepped out of the room, I saw Grace leading a few maids waiting outside. I couldn't help but scold her.
Why didn't you wake me up?
The sun was already up, and according to the rules, I should have gotten up early to make a couple of dishes and then pay my respects. But this girl didn't wake me, and I was so tired from yesterday that I overslept. Even though the young general waking up would elevate my status in the Wu family, not following the rules could still make me unpopular. I was a bit anxious, but Grace was not.
It was the lady's special instruction. She said the wedding was rushed, but the bride shouldn't suffer any less. Besides, the household meals are taken care of, so why trouble ourselves with such rules? Miss, you married well.
Grace whispered in my ear, her eyes full of joy. I didn't expect the Wu family to be so considerate. But was this consideration because David woke up, or was it genuine? I tapped Grace's forehead. This girl was too naive, only seeing the surface. She wouldn't even know if she was sold one day. With the anxiety of waking up late gone, I headed to the main hall. The Wu mansion was large, even bigger than the declining Smith mansion. Many people lived here, mostly the families of the Wu family's personal guards. There was an interesting story about this place. It was said that the Wu mansion was originally the Wu family estate. After General George achieved great success, the entire Wu clan prospered. But the Wu clan came from humble beginnings, and some clan members started misbehaving after gaining wealth. General George, being a man of principle, severed ties with the clan after they repeatedly ignored his warnings and changed the family name from Wu to Wu. That's how the Wu mansion came to be. With the clan ties severed, the mansion became empty. But General George divided the mansion into two parts, one for his family and one for the families of his personal guards. The mansion became lively again. This move almost caused an uproar in the capital. Letting servants live in the mansion? The noble families were in an uproar. But General George shut them up by saying,
"What servants? They're my godsons."
And that silenced the nobles. However, because of this, no matter how powerful the Wu family was or how favored by the emperor, they were still seen as lower class by the noble families. The Wu family was both prestigious and lonely, rarely seen at social gatherings in the capital. Before I reached the main hall, I saw the eldest daughter of the Wu family running towards me, holding a sword, looking like she had just returned from the training ground.
"Hello, sister-in-law."
The young girl called out to me, her tanned face full of joy. The young men following her all shouted in unison,
"Hello, sister-in-law."
Their voices were like thunder, startling the maids behind me. Fortunately, I was prepared, otherwise, I would have been just as startled.
"Sister-in-law, isn't it impressive? These are my little brothers. They'll do whatever I say. If my brother bullies you, just come to me, and I'll have him teach him a lesson."
"Miss, even if we all gang up, we can't beat the young master. Sending us is like sending us to our deaths."
Just then, General George walked over from a distance, saying loudly,
"Don't be afraid. If David dares to bully you, come to me, and I'll make sure to deal with that rascal."
David's wounds haven't fully healed, and you're already planning how to bully him? If he hears this, he'll be heartbroken,"
said a middle-aged woman in a green dress, standing next to a man in matching attire. Although last night was rushed, I remembered their faces. These two were David's parents. As they approached, I was about to bow, but General George stopped me.
"We don't stand on ceremony in our house. Besides, you're our lucky star. I can't bear to see our lucky star bowing to everyone every day.
From the way Grandpa is talking, there must be some good news, right?
There is. Guess what it is?
General George said playfully, refusing to reveal the answer no matter how much Miss Wu asked, much to her frustration. I was curious too, but I didn't ask. I didn't dare to be as straightforward as Miss Wu. I just stood there quietly, smiling.
Sometimes I felt I was as dull as my late mother, like a delicate but cold puppet, quietly placed in a corner, unnoticed and unaware of the outside world.
I watched this harmonious family. How many families in the world could live as freely as they did, unbound by etiquette?
The word envy flashed through my mind as a middle-aged man ran towards us from a distance, shouting,
To hell with it, I'm not serving those bastards anymore.
Judging by his appearance, he must be the legendary James, the so-called martial madman. I was about to bow again, but Miss Wu stopped me, hugging me and teasing James.
Now you understand my mother's and aunt's suffering?
Who knew those people were so shameless? They heard David woke up and wanted to send their children to me. Do I care about their grandsons? What nonsense! They even said they wanted to discipline me? Discipline my ass. Do they think I trained all these muscles for nothing? Now I can't even get rid of them. I should never have let them in.
No need to say more, James was clearly talking about the Wu family's old clan members. Ahem, General George cleared his throat, finally stopping James's rant.
So, you're David's wife? You look lucky. No wonder David woke up as soon as you married in. Uncle doesn't have much to give you. Money is too vulgar. Come with me later to the armory and pick a weapon you like.
Who gives a girl a weapon? Take out your private stash and get my daughter-in-law a set of gold jewelry.
Big brother, you know I spent all my money on martial arts manuals. How can I afford gold jewelry?
Ah, so which con artist tricked you this time?
A woman in red suddenly appeared behind James, pulling his ear and scolding.
Don't you know those con artists are waiting for you outside the mansion?
Ouch! It hurts!
James begged for mercy. This bickering couple added more warmth to the cold courtyard, a warmth more genuine and comforting than the formal warmth of the Smith mansion.
David's wife, remember to come to Uncle for a weapon later.
James ran off as soon as his wife let go, leaving her stomping her foot in frustration.
When I returned to the courtyard, I was holding a pile of treasures, which made David, lying on the bed, extremely envious.
I knew I wasn't my mother's real child.
Seeing his heartbroken expression, I couldn't help but laugh. It was strange, I had only been in the Wu family for a day, yet I already felt a sense of belonging. Thinking about this, my smile faded. The Wu family treated me too well, almost eerily so.
David suddenly stopped sighing and frowned. He fell off the bed with a thud, but managed to catch himself with one hand, avoiding a face-first fall. I hurried to help him up. What's wrong? You should lie down. I'll call the doctor.
Don't go. It hurts more when you leave.
I tried to get up, but he held my hands tightly.
It really hurts, it really hurts.
Where does it hurt? You seem quite energetic to me. If I didn't remember he was my husband, I would have kicked him off the bed and given him a good beating. This is the downside of marrying a living person. If he wants to stay with me tonight, I can't resist. If he sleeps elsewhere tomorrow, what can I do about it? He might seem to cherish me now, but who knows if he'll say the same things to someone else tomorrow.
My heart hurts. I don't know why, but it feels empty.
If it hurts, see a doctor. What's the use of holding on to me?
This illness can't be cured by a doctor. Only holding my wife can help.
Nonsense, sweet talk.
David didn't care if my words were pleasant or not. He just happily held me. I planned to slip out of his arms once he fell asleep, but I ended up falling asleep first.
When I woke up, it was already evening. My shoes were off, and even my outer clothes were gone. David, who should have been lying in bed, was nowhere to be seen. It was as if everything I had experienced in the past 2 days was just a dream. In my sleep, I seemed to hear David say,
If you ever feel troubled, just tell me. If no one else cares for you, I will.
I must have been dreaming. I knocked on my head to clear my mind.
Awake? I saw you were sleeping soundly, so I didn't wake you.
I bet you used some trick to make me sleep so deeply. Otherwise, how could I sleep so long?
Yes, I was afraid my wife would run away, so I used a trick to make her sleep soundly.
The setting sun's rays shone on him, making him look radiant. My heart suddenly raced. I didn't dare look at his face anymore and turned my gaze elsewhere.
But David walked towards me, clutching his chest, and said sadly,
Why doesn't my wife care about me at all?
How am I not caring about you?
Then why don't you ask me how I recovered so quickly?
I lowered my head, my face already burning, not knowing if it was from embarrassment or anger.
Because I benefited from your good fortune, that's why I recovered quickly.
Don't be ridiculous. I don't have such good fortune to make you lively. David didn't respond. He seemed to have taken my words to heart, or maybe he hadn't. I didn't want to argue with him about this. He could think whatever he wanted. I wasn't a sorceress, I couldn't change his mind. It wasn't just David who thought this way. Even Olivia, who always dismissed superstitions, believed it. I thought I wouldn't see Olivia for a while, but I ran into her on the day I returned home. Isabella and Emily quietly left, giving us space to talk.
Sister.
Though I was only a day older than her, she usually called me sister. Now, she called me sister. Was she angry with me? Angry that I took her marriage, her husband, and the wealth that should have been hers? If David hadn't woken up, I wouldn't have thought so much. After all, she was the one who ran away first. I wasn't at fault. But now, David had woken up. Everything had changed. I, who was supposed to be a widow, became the general's wife. Yesterday, the emperor even granted me the title of second-rank lady. This marriage, once looked down upon, had become desirable. And the one who should have it wasn't me. A moment ago, my sisters were flattering me, but now I lowered my head. I wanted to be like Helen, who could hold her head high even when she knew she was wrong. But when I heard Olivia's name, I couldn't help but feel guilty. I felt like a thief who stole everything that belonged to Olivia. I wanted to tell Olivia that David hadn't done anything. If she wanted to be with him, she could. I would stay with Margaret and take care of her. But I couldn't say it. In the end, I was greedy. Greedy for that bit of warmth and wealth. Otherwise, why couldn't I let go? Suddenly, Olivia hugged me, just like she did when I first arrived at the Smith family. I remembered that day, the little girl who was half a head shorter than me hugged me and said,
From now on, I'm your sister. No one can bully you.
But now, I had ruined this sisterhood. I couldn't help but cry. I wanted to let go. I wanted to go back to the Smith family and restore everything to how it was. At that moment, I saw David's figure. He stood in the distant corridor, looking at me. I raised my hand but then put it down. I seemed to hesitate. Aren't people selfish? I tried to convince myself, but no matter how I justified it, I couldn't find peace.
Sister, don't be angry.
She wiped the tears from my face and then smiled.
It was my mother and I who did wrong. Why are you crying like this? It makes it hard for me to say what I wanted to.
It was my fault. I shouldn't have taken your marriage. As David said, if it hurts, you should say it. I told Olivia my thoughts.
What do you mean my marriage? This marriage was meant for you. Otherwise, why would I run away?
Did my mother not tell you anything? What was Helen supposed to say?
She swapped our birth dates and gave them to the Wu family. If she hadn't gotten drunk that day, I would have been kept in the dark. How could she do this? I even left a note asking her to apologize to you, but she didn't. She's unbelievable.
So, you ran away for me? My eyes welled up with tears again. I understood Olivia's intention. If she didn't run, the mistake would continue. But by running, she gave the Smith family a way out and gave me a choice. I always felt I couldn't get close to the Smith family. After all, even my father despised me. How could they not? But now, my sister ran away from me. What about her future? How could I deserve such a sacrifice?
I had no choice but to run away. It wasn't for you. Don't make it sound like a romantic story. Actually, I think this marriage is quite good. Although it was to bring good fortune, the Wu family's reputation is excellent. You can't find a better family in the capital or even in the entire country. But the birth date isn't mine. I don't want this marriage. Running away was the best option. Swapping birth dates is worse than running away. It would definitely anger the Wu family, and I didn't want to cause trouble for my father and uncles. But my mother. If I didn't run quickly, she would have drugged me. That's why I didn't have time to explain to you before I left.
I really underestimated her shamelessness. How could I expect her to admit her mistake?
But you shouldn't have run away. What about your reputation? Why didn't you think about yourself?
Why didn't you think about yourself back then? Is the Smith family's reputation so important that you had to jump into the fire?
This is different. This marriage isn't a fire for me. After all, David already knew why I married him. Saying it out loud wasn't embarrassing.
If David heard this, he would be heartbroken.
Olivia said, glancing at David, who turned away and stumbled. Olivia and I laughed. I looked at her and felt the heavy stone in my heart disappear.
Running away from marriage might not be a bad thing for me. Although my reputation would suffer, if someone truly wanted to marry me, would they care about such baseless rumors? Besides, I've been staying at a nunnery outside the city these days. If anyone really wanted to ask, there's nothing that can't be explained.
Aren't you afraid of people gossiping?
Let them talk. I don't care, my father doesn't care, and neither does anyone else in my family. Whoever cares can be upset about it.
It was then that I realized this usually coquettish girl had a streak of defiance against societal norms.
But it was also a coincidence. If the Ethan family hadn't pressured us, given grandmother's and my uncle's love for us 4 sisters, this marriage wouldn't have happened.
The weight in my heart finally lifted. Since the emperor decreed me as a second-rank lady yesterday, I had been feeling uneasy. But after talking to Olivia, I felt much more at ease.
However, sister, you must let me share in your good fortune. I've been terribly unlucky lately.
Aren't you the one who doesn't believe in ghosts and gods?
Indeed, I don't believe in ghosts and gods, but I believe in good luck. You have no idea, I even encountered a female troublemaker at the nunnery. It was just my bad luck.
Goodness, another one gone mad.
Do you know who I am?
Sophia, my wife.
But the person your family was supposed to marry is Olivia.
David didn't answer. He sat beside me, quietly watching me, his once cheerful face now devoid of any smile.
Did you know about this?
The atmosphere inside the carriage instantly became heavy. After a long while, David reached out to me. I instinctively closed my eyes and shrank back, but the expected slap didn't come. Instead, a warm hand touched my forehead.
Not hot. Why are you talking nonsense? Now, who is lying in bed with me? Whose name is written in the Ethan family genealogy? I dare not leave you alone in the mansion, otherwise, who knows what might happen.
I'm not that foolish.
He looked at me with such affection that my cheeks grew warm.
Silly girl, what are you thinking about now?
Thinking. I won't tell you.
The carriage stopped, and I hurriedly ran outside. But I stumbled and almost fell. Fortunately, David was quick to catch me, or I would have fallen flat on my face.
Good thing your husband is here, or you would have made a fool of yourself.
My heart skipped a beat, and then I looked at his shoes.
If you hadn't stepped on my dress, would I have tripped?
David clutched his chest and looked at me with a hurt expression.
Wife, you're so mean.
He threw himself into my arms, leaving me at a loss. I fled from this embarrassing situation. David was simply too much. But before I could reach the courtyard, a young boy ran towards me. He was about 11 or 12, dressed in fine clothes, but I didn't remember anyone like him in the Ethan family.
Could he be a young master from another household?
Before I could figure out who he was, the boy reached out to me, his innocent face filled with resentment, not at all like a child of his age. Behind me was a pond. The sun was setting, and the water was very cold. If I fell in now, I might catch a chill. I instinctively dodged, but the boy missed and fell into the pond. An old woman rushed out from the corner, pointing at me and cursing.
You wicked woman! What did my Andrew do to deserve this? You pushed him into the pond. Oh dear, the Ethan family is cursed. How did they marry such an ungrateful woman? If you didn't want to adopt, you could have just said so. Why harm a child?
The old woman lay on the ground, throwing a tantrum, completely ignoring the child in the water. If the guards hadn't come to the rescue, the boy might have drowned. Grace wanted to reason with the old woman, but I stopped her. People like that wouldn't listen to reason. Seeing that I ignored her, the old woman got even angrier. She stood up, trying to slap me. I didn't dodge. If she had the guts, she could slap me, and I would pretend to faint. Who wouldn't know how to act weak? But before the slap could land, the old woman screamed. David appeared out of nowhere, grabbing the old woman's hand, his face full of menace, as if he wasn't the same person who had been joking with me earlier.
Ah!
David flung her aside.
Wife, are you all right?
He turned to me anxiously, winking. I immediately understood his intention. I rolled my eyes and pretended to faint.
Sophia.
I pinched his waist, signaling him to stop. With that kind of cry, anyone would think I was dead.
This? Don't pretend. I didn't even hit you.
Sister-in-law, this is too much.
George arrived, followed by a large group of people.
Brother, it was your granddaughter-in-law who started it. I didn't do anything to her. I just suggested that David marry Ahua. Look at who he's married to now. A vixen, full of deceit.
Sister-in-law, if you don't want to stay in the Ethan family, you can leave. We've already severed ties with your family. If anyone should leave, it's you. This mansion is mine. If anyone should leave, it's you. It's all because of this wicked woman. If she hadn't married in, I would have been the grandson of the great general.
The boy started throwing stones at us. If I weren't committed to my act, I would have jumped up and run away. But fortunately, David was quick to catch the stones, preventing me from getting hurt. The tension in the garden reached its peak. I didn't need to open my eyes to guess George's expression. As expected, he coldly ordered his men.
Where did this peasant woman come from? Get her out of here.
Brother, my husband died for you. How can you treat me like this?
George wasn't buying it this time. It seemed the Ethan family would completely sever ties with their old family. Indeed, such relatives were better off cut off. David carried me back to the courtyard. I wanted to get up after the old woman was dragged away, but David insisted on completing the act, so I had to endure the embarrassment of being carried back.
That Ahua is my granduncle's granddaughter. She used to come with my grandaunt to visit during the new year. Although our family severed ties with the old family, my second granduncle died saving my grandfather, so we've maintained contact with his family. But I have no interest in her. She always thought I liked her until I harshly scolded her. Don't worry, if she dares to trouble you, I'll be the first to deal with her.
Why are you telling me about her?
I turned my head away from David. I didn't know why, but whenever I saw his face, my heart would beat wildly, and it was an uncomfortable feeling.
I was afraid you'd listen to those troublemakers and misunderstand me. That grandaunt wanted to discuss us one last time before leaving. She's truly vile.
Who are you calling us? You were only known to me for a few days, yet you kept calling me your wife. Didn't you find it awkward?
You were brought in with a grand wedding. If you're not my wife, who is?
It was your sister who fetched me from the Smith family. By your logic, my husband should be your sister.
Sister-in-law, please don't joke about that. I still need to get married.
I seemed to hear the laughter of the Ethan family ladies. I burrowed under the covers, wishing I could dig a hole in the bed and escape. This was so embarrassing.
Mother, Sophia is fine. Sorry for troubling Dr. Huang.
Why did they even call a doctor? Now my embarrassment was known to everyone. I clutched the covers, wishing I could merge with them. But David lifted me up, startling me into a scream.
What are you doing?
People said the young general was fierce and intimidating, like a little devil. But to me, he was more like a mischievous imp. David flicked my forehead, the crisp sound echoing, causing me pain.
You. Humph.
I glared at him, covering my forehead. A 20-year-old man, still flicking people's foreheads.
If you hide under the covers again, I'll flick your forehead.
You sure are nosy, even controlling whether I hide under the covers.
If I don't control you, you might suffocate yourself, and no one would know.
Who would be foolish enough to suffocate themselves under the covers? I stopped rubbing my forehead, suddenly understanding his meaning. He wasn't worried about me suffocating, he was worried about my health. I looked up at David standing by the bed. He was looking at me, his eyes full of tenderness.
Why are you so good to me?
I turned to look into his eyes and asked. His hand stopped, as if he were frozen.
When I woke up, I saw a fairy-like person reaching out to me with her eyes closed. I thought she would be shocked or delighted to see me awake, but she looked disappointed.
David put down the ointment and sat beside me.
But she pretended to be happy. If I weren't smart, I would have been fooled. Later, when I revealed her thoughts, she was so flustered she almost cried. I thought, this person is really strange. This strange person looks 17 or 18 but acts so old-fashioned. I tried to joke with her to make her laugh, but she trembled as if I were going to harm her. It was quite heartbreaking. I didn't expect this old-fashioned person to act like a child when she slept, snuggling into my arms and calling me mother. If I hadn't been awake, I might have kicked her out of bed.
David drew out his words, waiting for my reaction.
Do I really move around and call you mother in my sleep? I couldn't believe it.
In the Anderson family, if I dared move around in my sleep, I would be punished. David must be teasing me again.
Of course. Look, you scratched me several times last night.
David pretended to pull down his clothes, scaring me into covering my eyes. How could he be like this, taking off his clothes so easily?
You are my wife, so I must take responsibility for you. If you're unhappy, I'll cheer you up. If you're uncomfortable, I'll find a way to make you feel better.
David knelt down solemnly, as if making a vow.
What do you want from me?
Your body.
Are you teasing me again?
I thought he would give a long speech or shamelessly say he wanted nothing, but I didn't expect him to say he wanted my body.
At first, I wanted your body. Now, I want all of you. I'm so greedy, I want both your body and heart.
David ran out of the room.
I heard you love osmanthus cakes. I'll make some for you now.
Alone in the room, my face flushed. I had never met anyone like David, who didn't follow the usual rules. Though he often teased me, I felt especially relaxed in his presence because I could be my true self with him. Not the well-mannered lady, the cautious outsider, or the orphan living under someone else's roof. It felt like I saw a ray of light in a dark, cold room. But would this light really shine into the room? When I saw that bright red hairpin, I realized that no light would enter the dark room. I had to admit that David changed me. He burst into my cold world like the sun, adding vibrant colors to my dull life. I craved his warmth, even ignoring the truth that men are unreliable. For now, I just wanted to immerse myself in this beautiful world until I saw that hairpin on the street and realized that even the most beautiful world could disappear one day. That day, I intended to go out with Chloe to relax, but as soon as we reached the fabric shop, I saw that hairpin. It was as bright red as I remembered, the half-bloomed hibiscus flower still as delicate as ever, but the person wearing it was no longer my mother. I remembered the day my so-called father gave that hairpin to my mother. Her smile was so deep, like a young girl, she inserted the hairpin into her hair, asking me repeatedly how beautiful it was. It was just a coral hibiscus hairpin, yet it made my mother so happy. But within a year, her smile disappeared. She put away the hairpin and no longer cared for that man, as if she had never married him. Now, the hairpin she once treasured was on someone else's head. I thought I was seeing things, but when the woman turned around, I realized I wasn't mistaken. The woman's features resembled my mother's by 5 parts, but her pretentious demeanor was worlds apart from my mother's.
Before I could react, a slap landed on my face, knocking me to the ground. The numbness in my face reminded me of my time in the Anderson family.
The dark, damp house reeked of decay. Women sat around like puppets, their faces devoid of expression, like corpses. I learned etiquette before them, while my mother knelt beside me. If I made a mistake, they would whip her legs with a cane. My cries would be drowned out by the rain. The louder I cried, the more my mother was punished. Poor Jasmine, who had joyfully told me she would return to the countryside to marry in a few months, didn't live to see that day. Just days later, she was dragged out of Uncle Robert's room, barely clothed, and punished with heavy wooden boards. Her life flowed away with the rain.
Jasmine wasn't guilty. I pleaded for her, but it only resulted in more punishments for my poor mother.
Can't even discipline your daughter. What use is a wife like you in the Anderson family, they often said. Though they were women, they trampled on the lives of other women. Aunt Lon, who ended her own life, April, who drowned. One by one, bodies were carried out of the Anderson family, including my mother's.
If not for that man, my mother would still be alive.
I looked up at the man whose face had aged but whose vile expression hadn't softened with time.
The woman wearing the hairpin looked at me in panic, then pretended to be gentle as she walked to the man's side. She was another pitiful woman like my mother.
The surrounding whispers reached my ears as Chloe ran over to help me up, shielding me with her small body like an unbreakable wall. But beyond that wall stood not people, but beasts ready to devour.
What are you doing?
Chloe stood in front of me, drawing her sword, while the man's guards raised their weapons.
Ethan family? You got married? How dare the Smith family marry you off without my permission?
I hid behind Chloe, too scared to speak, feeling as if all my strength had been drained. I remembered that rainy night, the man's iron fists raining down on my mother.
I had hidden in the wardrobe, only daring to come out after he left.
My mother comforted me, saying the Smith family would soon take us back to the capital, to a place full of flowers and sunshine. But the rain in Longxi lasted a long time. My mother didn't live to see the rain stop or the capital's splendor. That man locked us in the house, and in that cold, damp room, my mother gradually stopped breathing. She stared at the dead tree outside, her eyes full of tears. She said she didn't regret marrying him, only regretted falling in love. I thought I would forget the Anderson family's horrors and live well in the Smith family. But now, seeing that man again, I realized some things can't be forgotten. I remembered the torrential rain in Longxi, the cold, dark Anderson family, the flowing life, and endless punishments. I was terrified. Though the sun was overhead, I felt no warmth.
Suddenly, a large hand grasped mine. I turned to see David.
Who hit you?
He touched my face, but I didn't answer, wondering if he had treated my mother the same way. Pretending to be loving, only to discard her when she was no longer useful. Would David do the same?
It was him.
David strode towards the man, followed by the sound of 2 slaps. The guards wanted to draw their swords, but were intimidated by David's gaze.
Let's go.
He reached out to me, but this time, I didn't take his hand. Instead, he picked me up, intending to take me back to the mansion, but the man blocked his way.
Without my permission, who dares to take her away?
The man drew his sword, ready for a confrontation. David said nothing, just stared at him until he finally lowered his weapon and stepped aside. David carried me back to the courtyard. This time, he didn't tease me. We spent the time in silence, he at the desk writing, and I lost in thought on the bed. After a long while, David spoke.
I was afraid you wouldn't believe me, so I lied.
I ignored him, wanting to be alone.
Actually, I've seen you before. 8 years ago, I went to Longxi to study and met a young man named Lucas. He was like you, young but with an old soul.
Lucas, the eldest grandson of the Anderson family's second branch. I had met him once when he took my jade pendant.
One night, he came to me in the rain, begging me to deliver a letter to the Smith family in the capital, saying it was a matter of life and death.
Hearing this, my breath quickened. 8 years ago was when my mother passed away. This must be related to her. I looked at David, who continued.
I refused and told him to find someone else. But he knelt before me, saying the Anderson family intercepted all letters to the capital, and I was his only hope.
David then took out a jade pendant, the one Lucas had taken from me.
I rode 2 horses to death to deliver that letter. If not for this pendant, I wouldn't have done it.
When David returned to Longxi to retrieve the pendant, Lucas told him he had taken it from his cousin.
As a gentleman, I couldn't keep stolen goods. So, I returned to the capital to return it. But when I sneaked into the Smith mansion, I didn't find his so-called elegant cousin, only a scared girl hiding in a wardrobe.
Those candied fruits and dolls, were they from you?
I bought them for my sister and brought some for you.
I wasn't foolish. The Smith mansion wasn't on the way to the Ethan mansion. Looking at David, I felt he was different from others. His affection for me seemed genuine. At that moment, David approached with the paper he had been writing. I took it and saw the words divorce agreement.
What does this mean?
I didn't know whether to be happy or sad. If I took this agreement, I could leave with dignity and a substantial settlement from the Ethan family. But I felt a deep sorrow, not understanding why David would give me this agreement after professing his love for me just days ago. The sun outside was obscured by clouds, and a storm was brewing. David wiped my tears gently, saying,
I can sense your unease. You're afraid I'll leave you or fall for someone else, so I gave you this agreement. If I ever change my heart, you can leave with the Ethan family's wealth, without being trapped in this mansion. But I won't give you a reason to leave. I'll treat you well for life, and when we're old and can't walk anymore, you can burn this agreement in front of me.
Talk is cheap. Who knows, you might bring home a young girl someday.
I tried to retort proudly, but tears fell uncontrollably, making me look ridiculous.
Then we'll see. I'm afraid you'll bring home a young man before I bring a girl.
David said, clutching his chest in mock sorrow. This 6-foot-tall man acting like a delicate wife made me laugh. The rain finally started, enveloping the capital in a downpour. The cold wind rustled the trees, but I fell asleep peacefully, knowing he would always be by my side. But our peaceful days were short-lived. That annoying hypocrite showed up.
What's wrong with sharing a husband with your sister?
He nearly drove me to collapse. How could someone be so disgusting?
Shut up. Coming here to disgust us early in the morning? Why don't you share a wife with someone else?
Mind your manners. We're all civilized people.
The third prince reminded, earning glares from the Ethan family. If not for him, that man wouldn't have entered the Ethan mansion.
We don't understand your scholarly nonsense. We only recognize Sophia as our daughter-in-law. Anyone else can get lost.
Sophia, what do you think?
His eyes were full of threat.
I follow my husband's lead,
I said, passing the decision to David. David put down his tea and smiled.
My courtyard is too small for so many people. If Miss Anderson is truly desperate, why not serve the country in the army?
The man's face changed instantly.
Barbarians!
He spat, leaving in a huff, followed by the third prince and my sister, who gave David a meaningful look before leaving.
Darling, I think your sister is trouble. Her look could kill.
You're doomed. She holds grudges but won't easily cause harm.
Though she was adopted, we had a good relationship. She often stood up for me when we were young. But after my mother's relationship with that man soured, we drifted apart. I didn't expect her to come to the capital.
As I predicted, my sister did retaliate. When I saw David's bright red lips, I knew who was behind it. You should have refused politely. Now you're suffering.
Humph, your sister is a scoundrel like Lucas, always scheming. If she has guts, she should challenge me to a duel.
To our surprise, Lucas appeared, not to trouble David but to crash a wedding, even stealing a duke's bride. The most pitiful was my David, tricked by Lucas 8 years ago and again now. I attended my sister's wedding. After all, she was a good person in my memory. But I didn't expect to see my husband there, dressed in red, unconscious in the bridal sedan. The bride was gone, replaced by an impostor. That day's wedding became a laughingstock, even making the emperor lose his appetite. The Anderson family's days were tough after that. My so-called father returned to the Anderson family in disgrace, and my poor husband was so embarrassed he didn't dare to leave the house.
Darling, how many people do you think saw me in women's clothes?
I held him in my arms, trying to comfort him.
Not many, just the Crown Prince, the Second Prince, the Third Prince, Princess Luna, Duke Andrew, Duke Arthur, Duchess Eleanor, Marquis Charles, Scholar Ethan.
Stop counting. The more you count, the more anxious I get. How can I ever show my face in the capital again?
It's okay, you'll always be the most beautiful in my heart.
Why? Why the most beautiful and not the most handsome? You said it's okay, but if you keep this up, I'll get angry.
All right, I know I was wrong. Speaking of which, Emma and Lucas were really meticulous, even giving my husband a delicate makeover when they eloped. While I was still thinking about that day, David's hands started to wander. What are you doing? I guessed his thoughts and blushed instantly. It was broad daylight, after all, how could he?
Your sister and brother-in-law got me into this mess, so shouldn't you make it up to me?
His reasoning seemed to make a bit of sense.